I think we can all agree the fantastic exhaust sound that comes out of the Flying Banana is among the greatest of all time. So hopefully everybody enjoyed that intro, because we're not going to be hearing this thing for a while. I'm Jamie, this is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is a broken banana. Hey, fair warning, this is one of those YouTube videos where absolutely nothing is going to happen. I'm going to tell you about this project and everything wrong with it, and trust me, there's a lot. But we're not going to do any actual work. If you're one of those commenters that hates that, or complains often that I talk too much, well, maybe don't watch my channel at all, but definitely sit this one out. This is my 1967 Dodge A100 pickup truck. I named this thing the Flying Banana, and no, I will not be changing the name, no matter how many people try to give me clever suggestions. As A100s go, this one is in pretty typical condition, meaning it's completely made out of Bondo and rust holes. But there are some things that make it not so typical. Specifically the 440 mounted in the front of the bed with a super stubby 727 behind it. Well, that's a little different than most A100 pickups. Friends of the channel, Byron, Allen, and I put this thing together in the space of like 3 or 4 days. Now I say put together, it did already have a 440 in the place you see it now, but it came with a set of random cylinder heads that were full of water and rust. It didn't have the tunnel ram, it didn't have the flipped B-body headers, or the fantastic purple horny mufflers. In that first video, we did manage to get it running and do some glorious burnouts before the rain moved back into the Pacific Northwest for like 3 straight months. It did not do wheelies in the street, it just blew the tires off, and there are a lot of reasons for that, which we're gonna cover today. Why is this full of like dead brush? What is this, a nest? Oh, don't hit that. That first episode was remarkably popular. In a follow-up episode, I ripped out the horrible electrical nightmare under the dash here and rebuilt this system essentially from scratch. No one really watched that one, but it was a big improvement for the truck. Hey, I actually called it a truck. Usually I forget what it is and call it a van, truck, thing. God, this thing is garbage. My plans after the wiring refit were to swap out the shifter for one that actually works, get a roll bar in here, and some racing harnesses. That way, we'd be ready to hit the track. And that was the last time I really did anything with it. Although I have teased it in a couple of videos, mostly it's just been sitting in the shop waiting its turn. Today it's sitting on my 4-post lift where the crappy 69 Charger used to be. Of course, I got rid of that thing. I traded it for the Perkins Plymouth. It's in pretty good company here, sitting next to the Barracuda, which we've actually been working on. We'll talk about that in the near future, probably. Getting the Banana up on that 4-post lift was, let's say, challenging for Alan and I. And that would be because it doesn't move anymore. At least not under its own power. I don't remember if it was the end of the first video or the beginning of the second video when I realized that this special custom-built super stubby 727 automatic transmission was fully brimmed with strawberry milkshake. I should have known that that transmission was full of rainwater because the engine was. I drained like 4 or 5 gallons of rainwater out of this thing. Thankfully, the engine survived the experience. I should have known the transmission was full of it too. I even pulled this dipstick at one point and noticed it was massively overfull. The fluid on the stick looked like normal fluid, of course, but when water gets into these components, it gathers at the bottom and the oil moves upward above it. It doesn't mix until you run the thing, and then, well, the pump does its work. I should have done something about it at the time. I should have drained it through this drain plug. If I had gotten all of that water out, everything would have been perfectly fine. But I didn't. I was in such a hurry to get this thing fired up before the rain rolled in, I just kind of ignored that. And now I'm paying for it because this transmission is screwed. I was told by a couple commenters at the time exactly what was going to happen. Essentially, the water inside the transmission heats up and starts turning to steam. As it does that, the steam loosens the adhesives on the various transmission components, keeping the friction material in place. Those friction materials, namely clutches and bands, are the parts inside your automatic transmission that make transmissioning happen. So when they get ruined, the whole thing grinds to a halt. From the jump, this transmission seemed a little slippy, but it did transmit enough power to the back wheels to do gigantic rolling burnouts, so I chalked it up to maybe a super loose converter or something. I can't remember at what point I did drain all of that milkshake fluid and change it for fresh stuff, but clearly the damage had already been done. Now, as I've explained in the past, this is a very special transmission. It's custom built for this application. Hardcore Mopar guys might look at this and think, that's the short tail motorhome van divorce transfer case 4-wheel drive truck transmission with a short tail housing. No, it's not. It's actually much shorter than that. Here's a profile view of the custom tail housing. Note, it is tiny. I measured it in the first video. I think it's something like 4 inches tall or long or whatever. This thing has no park section. There is nothing in there but output shaft. This is the only one of these I've ever seen. I'm not saying there are no more on the face of the earth, but I am saying I wouldn't be able to find another transmission built like this if I wanted to. So we need to rebuild this transmission. Okay. I'm not exactly an automatic transmission expert, but I have had my hands in a few of them, and in a future video, we're gonna do that. There's a problem with that though, getting the transmission out. See, the way this thing is put together, there's no drive line. There's one U-joint right there attached to a slip yoke that goes into the transmission. That U-joint is bolted straight to the rear end. So because of that, there is no way to slide this transmission rearward off of the engine. Well, all right, maybe we can just unbolt the rear axle, slide that rearward, and then get the transmission out. No, the rear axle is welded solid to the frame. Maybe we can just slide the engine forward. Well, yeah, but we're gonna have to take some things off. Look how close the water pump pulley is to the dual electric fans. We've got like a 1/2 inch of space there. So either the fans have to come out, the pulley has to come off, maybe the whole water pump. It's gonna be dumb. And then we have to get this whole cross member loose too. There is one other option. We could unbolt these cross members, one at the front for the engine, one at the back for the transmission, and then drop the entire drivetrain out the bottom, much in the same way the factory installed the drivetrains from below in most classic Chrysler products. It's probably obvious that this will be complicated. For one thing, we don't have a K-frame engine cradle to balance it on like in the cars. We'll have to support it from above somehow, maybe let it down with a come-along or a couple straps, or maybe wing the engine lift in there. I don't even know. I do actually have an overhead crane in the shop, and it happens to be located over the other drive-on lift, so putting it here and dropping the drivetrain down with that might be an option. But that thing's only rated for 500 pounds, and even if we could drop the drivetrain down with it carefully, we probably can't lift it back up. Either way we do this, it's going to be a big giant job to drop this drivetrain out. And when we're done fixing the transmission, we'll be putting it right back into a terrible chassis setup that probably doesn't at all work for what this thing is designed to do. So I'm thinking about making some changes. We can't go any farther without looking at this again. This, of course, is Bill Maverick Golden's Little Red Wagon Wheelstander. This thing is the reason the Flying Banana exists. It's a clone of the same idea, although of course it's a little bit different. Instead of an 800 horsepower blown Hemi here in the middle, we've got a naturally aspirated 440, but either way, the engine is in this location and it's connected through a short transmission directly to the rear axle. Now the front end of the Little Red Wagon is essentially exactly what we've got already. It's a stock A100 axle. While the springs may be slightly different, it's definitely configured like the factory truck. But the rear suspension is a different story, and that story is there actually is a rear suspension. Oh, that's the same tail housing we've got. Now there were different versions of the Little Red Wagon. The original one ended up looking like this at some point, maybe in the early 70s, I don't remember. This is apparently the replacement Little Red Wagon that Bill Maverick built in 1977. Yes, despite saying the original Wheelstander on it, it's not the original Wheelstander. This detail shot of the engine bed area of that truck is the best I've found that explains the suspension setup in the Little Red Wagon. Note, just like the Banana, this thing has a slip yoke with a single U-joint and it's connected straight to the rear axle. It's actually extended further out of the tail housing than my truck. This is probably for easier service, if I were to hazard a guess. To accommodate that while keeping the axle in the same factory position, the entire engine is actually scooted forward like 1.5 inches. That puts the valve cover of the Hemi almost under the cab. But the back here is what I'm really interested in. You can see here some shiny chromed leaf springs and also a pair of shocks, which are kind of facing forward. Essentially, you've got frame members that go from a pivot point up here on the frame back to the axle. These act as giant ladder bars in addition to acting as a subframe. You've got leaf springs mounted to the axle and mounted to the body, and you've got shocks here that do help to control the movement of those leaf springs. But essentially, this is a big giant ladder bar suspension. Now looking at the Banana, we can tell right away this is what they had in mind, because we've got two big gigantic square tube sections that come from the axle and head forward. Except they stop early. Instead of coming to the pivot point that the Little Red Wagon has up here, they're boxed to the frame right here. And obviously, thanks to all of those welds, there is no pivoting action. And of course, they're welded solid to the axle through these little box sections as well. It's almost like they wanted to have the pivot point right here, but then they gave up. Maybe that was not the plan, I don't know. I do know that that wouldn't have ever worked because with this setup, with no driveline, with no ability to flex between the transmission and the axle, you would need all of this to be mounted solidly together. That's how it's done on the Little Red Wagon. The engine mounts here come off of this bar. I don't know if this is the stock A100 axle or if this is a truck axle. I don't have another A100 to compare to. You can see there are leaf pads here, which would put springs way out here. That's certainly not where they are on the Little Red. You can see in that picture they were mounted inboard, like here-ish. It's a little funky looking from this angle, but this sure looks like a boxed hanger section that comes off the inside of the frame rail, and then the leaves are mounted inboard. There must be some kind of spring shock plate there, and then this shock comes off and points forward. I don't know how effective that could be at this angle, but there must be some reason they did that. I believe the rear end is set up this way in the Banana because it was quick, dirty, and cheap. It looks like a Little Red Wagon, but it's not going to work like a Little Red Wagon. We are not ever going to get this thing to shift and transfer the weight over the rear tires with a solid welded rear end like this. There has to be some amount of suspension. So yes, we have a blown up 727 transmission that needs to come out for a rebuild. It just seems to me that at the same time, we really ought to do something with this setup. This is our chance to make all of this kind of sort of right and get this thing to perform. There's like 100% chance I whack my head on one of these wheelie bar mounts before I'm done here. Oh yeah, also we've got some fluid leaking out of the rear right axle shaft or brake. Yeah, I think that's gear oil. So I guess we need to overhaul the rear end as well. Oh, I have no idea what rear gear we've got in this thing. I tried to calculate it with the rear axle up on jack stands, but the turns were not making sense. It was acting as though there was no limited slip in here, which is weird because on the ground, it just blew both tires right away every time reliably. It is the good heavy-duty 489 case, that's the good news. I may well end up putting fresh gears and a locker in this chunk. There are so many other small things that are not ideal on this thing, like the fuel line, for example. This needs a rethink. The transmission cooler, yes, it's gigantic, but there's no way any air reaches this, so it probably does nothing. The radiator setup is maddening. It's super tall, sits down really low, and has to be kicked at this funky angle to fit below the custom tunnel thing in place of the original doghouse. I have no idea what that radiator is even out of. Like I said, it's super, super tall. I measured the dual fan setup on that thing. It's 18 inches, and the radiator sticks like 4 inches below that. It just so happens that the typical 26-inch car radiator, which looks like this, has an 18-inch tall core. So I'll probably use one of these and that fan setup, and that'll solve a lot of problems. Just looking at the way this monstrosity sits, I'm pretty sure we'd be able to lower the top of the radiator a couple inches, straighten it out, and even move it forward a little bit, while still gaining clearance down here. That would give us a lot more room at the front of the engine, which may be important in the future for reasons. It should be noted that in the real Little Red Wagon, there is no radiator, because race car. I'm sure that's like a fully filled block, and it's one of those run it and then tear it down type situations. I'm gonna have to insist on keeping a working cooling system in this thing. Also, lights and stuff, because at some point in the future, it might be really cool to do a drag and drive with this. Even if I never do that, I like radiators and water cooling and factory type systems, so that's what I'm gonna stick with. What the heck do I know about designing a suspension system? Well, precious little. I've literally never done it before. But of course, I do have an example to go on, although I have precious few good shots of the suspension setup in the Little Red. Check this out though. This is from a video about the auction, Kissimmee, or however the heck you say that, 2022, when the rebuilt Little Red went up for sale. This shot of underneath the truck shows that subframe, and it actually isn't quite how I thought, like angled like a ladder bar. It sits parallel with the main frame of the truck. Even more interesting than that, you can see that the engine is actually mounted on a little cradle at the very front of this frame section, but it pivots like a foot and a half further back. Like almost exactly where this bracket that's been cut in half and welded back together is located. Dude, listen, I still want to change the suspension setup on this thing, and this transmission's still probably messed up, but I think I figured out why it didn't have any gears. So I decided this transmission was blown up and that I needed to tear apart this entire truck because of a missing pin. Okay, still, all the things I said apply, and I really do want to add suspension to this thing. So I'm going to proceed with that idea. But first, let's see if it moves, I guess. Lowering the world's crappiest drive-on lift. Stealing a battery. Oh, I should have stolen the lighter one. Doing this carefully. There's still fuel in there. You know, this is one of my proudest accomplishments in life. It's just fantastic and beautiful and magnificent, and it even kind of runs okay. Flipping the thing, big money. I probably could have primed it. It just sounds so good. But do we have N gear? Yes. Yes. Yes, we do. That was dumb. Fans. What a good idea. Oh, it smells fantastic. What's an entire pack of cotter pins or hairpins cost? Like $8? One of them's got to be worth like 3 cents or something. That's what broke this thing? All right, so the transmission fluid does still look a little hazy. I should probably like change it again, but I think we might get away with this. All right, so this one isn't blown up yet, but there's a funny side story to this. The same day we thought this transmission had died, we discovered that the turbo truck, the 1977 D100 with a slant 6 and a turbo, would also no longer move under its own power. Or it kind of would a little bit, especially if you like pushed it to help it. Pulling the transmission dipstick, we found that one was also full of strawberry milkshake. So that transmission's been removed, along with the entire engine, and we'll talk about that later. Well, now I just want to do burnouts all day. I suppose this is a good news, bad news situation. The good news is the banana actually still drives, so maybe we can see something cool happen this year. The bad news is there goes the premise for this video. Forgot about this. Spiders! Anyway, before I was rudely interrupted, I was working on designing a suspension system. The last thing I did was measure the axle center line to the top of the frame. I want to keep the suspension ride height roughly where it is, and so I thought that would be a good data point to have. Turns out it's 10 inches on the driver's side, but it's only 9.5 inches or even less on the passenger side. I found a useful reference point in the front spring hanger bracket. I measured 65 inches from roughly the center line of the axle to the back of that bracket. To keep the wheelbase at 90 inches and keep the rear tires centered in the wheel opening, I'll have to make sure that relationship stays the same. I've been staring at this for quite a while now, trying to figure out why they put the pivot in that spot. Is there some specific reason? The length of the beam? Was it just convenient? Was it a random guess? I don't know. Looking at period photos, I've realized the original Little Red was different. There was actually a hanger bracket like here on that truck, and the beam was outside of the frame and ran all the way forward here. It also appears to have come up at an angle more like what I had in mind and what this truck has right now. I've noticed this remake has an extra panel here, presumably to hide that frame. I've also noticed it has more of a rake than I want. At least a bit of that must be down to tire height. This tire completely fills the available wheel opening. I'm not planning on going that large, but that does remind me I got new wheels for this thing. Currently, it's got 14-inch steel wheels on the back that are not very wide at all. I got these from Tom Hergert with Rocket Restorations. Apparently, they were run on a Max Wedge car at some point. It's a 15-inch wheel, and currently it's got an ancient M&H Racemaster tire. I think this is a 15 by 9. I'd like to go a little wider than this, maybe a 10. Interesting note, the tires on the car right now are also M&H Racemasters. They say 9/9.5 inch wide on them, but they only measure about 7. Judging by these markings, they were retreaded or something. I know nothing about this witchcraft. I also grabbed this pair of mag wheels for the front. I like the style, but they really need to be more narrow. I'd like to have like the pizza cutter thing going on, and these aren't quite that. They're also only 14-inch in diameter. Anyway, back to the other thing. Measuring from the same reference point, the back of the front hanger, I found 13.5 inches to essentially the middle of the current engine mounting tab. There's just a straight piece of steel, and then it's connected to that tubular thing which sort of bends forward like this. That later Little Red Express system puts the frame member this way. The engine picks up here, and the mount must be right about here. Again, for some reason, this pivots behind the engine mounting. The only thing I can think is that moving the mount point for that member changes the arc. Essentially, if it's pivoting here, its arc will look like this, and if it's pivoting here, its arc will look like this. Is that important? I don't know. The suspension system isn't going to have very much travel, so I don't know how much of that arc it's even going to use. Here's what I was thinking. Essentially, I extend what it has now. It mounts to the bottom of the axle and comes up straight. It passes the engine mount and then connects to the frame. There will be a hanger that comes down here, and it will be mounted using a bushing like a leaf spring or something. So here's basically what I had in mind. A pivot point right here, ahead of the engine mounting, but obviously behind the mounting point for the front leaf spring. This is a beam that comes down underneath the frame, in line with the frame, mounted directly beneath it, and goes underneath the axle, much like the existing beam does. Now, instead of welding this thing solid, I envision a leaf pad, essentially flipped upside down and put at the appropriate angle, and we could use that as a centering pin location. We can have U-bolts that clamp this thing onto the axle, so none of it moves, but it can be taken apart. Now the leaf spring will do the actual springing here. It'll be mounted above the axle. Typically that's not great for high performance, but we don't have to worry about axle wrap here because we have the world's most massive ladder bar, essentially. Now my initial plan for this was a set of trailer springs. Probably bigger than this. This is just what I have sitting around for an example. However, the Little Red Wagon uses a Mopar style car spring or something like that. And I think we're gonna need to do the same thing for a couple reasons. First, this is way, way heavier duty than that. We are going to throw some power through this rear axle, and we might like to have it planted in place better than the dinky little trailer spring can provide us. More importantly, the thing that makes the leaf springs in a Muscle Era Mopar car so great is the same thing that makes it the right piece for this application. This front segment can essentially be tied together solid. There will be basically no flex here, and the back section is where all of the movement will happen as this thing goes through its suspension arc. Remember, this bar is fixed in place, so this spring is going to be following this bar's movement. It's kind of just along for the ride. What we want to do is keep this segment of the spring solid, but we do need to account for the compression of that leaf spring. We'll do that at the back here, probably with an old school shackle, although we could get fancy and use a slider. There, that looks less symmetrical. We've got a solid fixed hanger in the front. It'll be less tall. Listen. Front leaf hanger, shackle at the back, and remember this leaf is mounted inboard of the frame. If anyone can think of why that angled bar is a bad idea, let me know, but I'm pretty sure this works. I'm pretty sure this would do the job. It's relatively simple, and I can imagine all of the pieces it would take to make this happen. Looking at this setup again, those look like truck springs. I'm pretty sure they are symmetrical. Maybe they're even based on the factory A100 pieces? I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about this a little bit more. I mean, it's on the Little Red Wagon, so it obviously works. I'm just concerned that that symmetrical spring is gonna be trying to compress and push itself forward, which it can't do because of the subframe. Maybe I'm missing something. This is just the best sounding thing. It's perfect. Purple hornies and headers for the win. It sure is interesting looking at this thing and realizing that it's been built, hacked up, and rebuilt like, well, at least twice. Anyway, I've got my tape hooked on this frame member now. I would be running it a couple inches past the axle, and that again is so I can use a leaf spring pad and mount it onto that with some kind of U-bolt situation. But I've got it hooked on there now. Somewhere around 6 feet from the end of that thing, there was something else welded here that's gone. 6 feet seems like a nice round number for these beams to measure. So I ran my tape past that pad a couple inches, so I'm sure we're good there. Then I put the middle of the tape about here where the pickup point would be, and right in line with that is this. So X marks the spot on the brackets I would be installing, very much like this, but beefier that would hang a bushing here and support this beam. You know, another side benefit of rearranging all of this, I wanted to change the engine mounting anyway. You see, they had all the room in the world here to use an actually good oil pan, but they decided to use the Muscle Era Mopar big block pan, which has a mid-sump and a habit of starving this engine for oil when cool stuff happens. Now, I have some different ideas for this. Here's one of them now. This is an aluminum big block marine oil pan. I took this off of a marinized 440 that was previously in a boat. We actually installed that engine in the Toolbox 1973 Dodge Charger, and obviously this wasn't gonna fit. This would be perfect for the job here. It's actually got internal baffles, so that'll help prevent oil from splashing around in there. And obviously it's got a deep sump area in the back. The whole thing is kind of sump, so this will hold a ton of extra oil compared to that. In some wheels up views of the Little Red Wagon, you can plainly see a long straight oil pan much like this, so I know I'm on the right track there. You know, I've actually got better ideas for a lot of stuff on this rig. For example, this situation. So many people commented to tell me that the exhaust right next to the fuel tank was unsafe, as if I didn't know that when I did it. This is temporary. This was always temporary. I did this to get it running that week to finish a video. My plan has always been to point the exhaust up and outward and to move the fuel tank. Not only are we going to be moving the fuel tank now, we're going to straight up replace it. Evan at Rocket found a bigger, shinier one that'll fit very nicely right here. So Alan's got that right now. He's going to be polishing it actually. It's going to be amazing and ridiculous and way too nice for this truck. And then we'll get it installed. I mentioned in one of the earlier videos that this thing previously had dual batteries. We're going to be going back to that. We'll have dual Group 31 threaded post batteries, one sitting behind each wheel well. Now this should help with the crappy starting situation. I'll also be cleaning all of the connections at these cables and maybe just straight up replacing them. But 2 big giant batteries and a tank of fuel right here at the back bumper, well, that sounds like ballast. That's certainly going to help shift our weight distribution rearward and get some more leverage for weight transfer and wheelies. On the old school torsion bar Mopar drag racer, you run either a drilled front shock or a totally worn out front shock. I'm thinking with the front leaf springs, that's probably not a good idea on this one, so I'm likely going to invest in some real 90-10 shocks for this thing. Again, the idea behind that is easy weight transfer. We want the front axle to be able to droop right out when the throttle is pinned. While I'm thinking about it, there are actually a couple things I'm looking for the truck. One of those is a tailgate. A100 tailgates are not exactly easy to come by. I do have the side of a van cut out of one in the junkyard that I could use to make one, but I don't really want to. Also, they look different. So, I don't know. If you're in the Pacific Northwest or willing to ship and you're hoarding one of these tailgates, please let me know that. I've got to have somewhere to put my Miss Chiquita mural. Also, maybe a parachute. I need a roll bar or a main hoop. Now, these are available commercially, and I don't mind buying one at all, but it's got to be pretty tall to match this cab. This needs to stand 48 to 51 inches or so off of the floor. So if you happen to know where to buy one that matches that description, or you can bend me up one and ship it to me, let me know that too. If you've watched this video and listened to my extensive plans for this thing, then you know I have every intention of turning it into an actually capable drag racer and or Wheelstander. At some point, this low compression cast crank motorhome 440 is probably not going to cut it in the horsepower department, and we're going to have to upgrade this. I consider this 440 the training wheels engine. It'll be very useful to become accustomed with this chassis and, let's say, the unique driving experience. In the future, I have every intention of putting some more horsepower in here. Now that could come in the form of the high compression forged crank former drag racing engine I borrowed the heads from. This thing had a solid lifter cam and all kinds of other neat go-fast pieces. But if you've got a period Wheelstander and you've got a 426 Hemi with nowhere else to go, well, you see where I'm going with this. Ah, my tape measure. I want to pop little wheelies and run down a drag strip. And if we can do that successfully, well, then we'll move on. We'll add some horsepower and we'll see if we can't get it to do the cool stuff, by which I mean, of course, humongous wheel stands. If, and only if, we end up going down that path, I will be making some of the classic Wheelstander modifications, like a window in the floor, or the firewall section here anyway, so I can see the track when this thing is wheels up. Another classic Wheelstander modification is splitting the rear brake controls so that the thing can be steered mid-air by braking one rear tire or the other. The number of comments I got about this on the first video is astounding. for some reason people think I've never heard of this or thought of it, we're not going to worry about that at all unless and until this thing proves it wants to be a real Wheelstander. Oh, I think these are the factory upper shock mounts for the back here. We could use those, fix the bottom of the shock somewhere in this area, and they would be sitting at an angle, but not as crazy of an angle as the Little Red. Man, what a roller coaster. I thought this thing was totally dead when I started this video. I thought we'd have it in pieces in the coming weeks, but instead, I don't know, maybe we won't. If I could get the safety stuff handled, we could make some test hits as it is. You know, if nothing else, then to prove that I really need to rework all of this. That could be fun. I've been absolutely jamming on my big gigantic dart sport project, also various engine builds for other people. I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel though. Soon enough, I'll be able to dedicate some real time to my drag racing projects, and I can't wait. Hopefully you'll stick around to see that and whatever other zany projects we come up with here at Dead Dodge Garage. Until then, as ever, thank you very much for watching. And remember, cotter pins. What a good idea. Oh, also remember to grab your tools before you run the lift up.